So one thing I didn't really have on my 2025 prediction calendar was the return of Dynasty Warriors. Yes, in many ways, Dynasty Warriors has been a series that has been struggling for a while. In fact, I would argue like peak Dynasty Warriors might be Dynasty Warriors 5 or 7 or one of those, but it's been a long time since we've actually had the series be a bright spot. In fact, I would argue that best things that you could say about the more recent releases is they're just kind of redundant. And the most recent one, Dynasty Warriors 9, it just missed the mark. It was not a good game. And we did see Team Ninja work on Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, and I kind of figured like that was going to be the direction they go in because I know that game was relatively popular and I think a lot of people were really interested in it. But for me, it still didn't feel like Dynasty Warriors. It felt more like a Souls-like, which is, I guess, the direction they were going for anyway. But honestly, I didn't think that they were working on completely revolutionizing the series like they have. While Dynasty Warriors Origins isn't perfect, it still breathes a new life into the series that has desperately needed it. So let's sit down and talk about Dynasty Warriors Origins. Before we do though, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and it makes me feel better about spending countless hours on Dynasty Warriors and not paying attention to anyone else. Anyway, Dynasty Warriors Origins starts off in a much different way than what we're used to. You see, typically with Dynasty Warriors, it's almost like a fighting game in a way. I know that seems kind of crazy when you think about how the gameplay is typically hack and slash through giant armies and you're working with your own to kind of coordinate and tactically take down some enemies and work together and all of that. But the reason why I say it's sort of a fighting game is because you're choosing from a large pool of characters that you can be and ultimately looking to face off another character or multiple characters in a level and see how that all plays out. But this one is not that way at all. This is much more of a first-person RPG storytelling version of the Three Kingdoms. Now, while you do get to customize your main character a little bit, you're pretty much set forth on one path, and this character is going to be the one that you see the entire game through. While they still do a really good job of telling the story of the Three Kingdoms, it's from a different perspective. Your character is a nomad. You're not really attached to any of the armies or any sides. In fact, you're kind of a mystery, but you do get to see how all of these armies and all these characters interact with each other, and most importantly, I think, how they change. And that's a huge part of the story because your character is sort of a redeemer of sorts. You're kind of known as the Guardian of Peace, although I do think it's funny that they call you the Guardian of Peace when your body count is usually in the triple digits or so. But essentially, how it starts off, and I'm not going to get too far into it because when it really opens up, like past the Yellow Turban Rebellion, it really gets good, and I don't want to ruin anything for anyone, but during like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, you see how it was started out in righteousness, and how there was a lot of validity to there being an uprising like there was, but you also see the leaders start to turn. Power started to change them, and once they did have power, they let it go to their heads, and greed and corruption ended up destroying their movement because they ended up not being much better than the government that they were trying to replace, or the one that they were at least revolting against. And so, as it stands, that was your place to come in and make things right. And that's one thing I really think is cool about the story of this game, is that if you're anywhat familiar with Dynasty Warriors, you know how some of these characters change just in the old tellings of the game. But now that there's a much more deep complexity to the story, you really can see how not being attached to any of the Three Kingdoms and how kind of righting some wrongs and really making you as the Redeemer, this really comes out to be very fascinating and really fun. It's just, I love the way that they decide to go with this story because I think enough of us knew these stories over and over. It's the same story in every Dynasty Warriors game, so to be able to have a new approach to that was just awesome. And another place that there was some major changes was just in how you navigate your character. You see, before it was almost like a level selection, but now you actually have this gigantic map that you roam around on, and you can find a lot of side quests to do. You can also just find matches, or I should just say random battles that you could level up your character, find new weapons, things of that nature. I did that far too much, honestly, because I was really into like upgrading my character. The skill tree is pretty cool, and it's one of those things that's obtainable, so there's so many random battles that you can choose to go into or not, and I did quite a bit just because I wanted to keep leveling my character up. But just that perspective in itself was completely different. Having this overview of this giant map that you're walking through instead of the level selection was also just a really cool addition. Now, aside from that, the gameplay itself, in many ways, is kind of the same. There's still that old feeling of Dynasty Warriors where when you're against random soldiers, it's a lot of hack and slash. In the best way possible, because honestly, at its heart, to me anyway, that is part of the fun, is just the seeing how high a number you can rack up. But at the other point of it, and I think this is what is most important, is when you're actually against other enemy officers, then the game takes a little bit of a turn, makes things a lot more interesting and a lot more challenging, if you will. Not like Souls like challenging or anything of that nature, but no, there's almost this implementation of a rock, paper, scissors kind of mechanic that has to do a lot with not only blocking and parrying and things of that nature, but also using your skills. There are certain skills that at certain times will give you a better outcome. So much of that is just based upon what the enemy officer is doing, what moves they're doing, and how you counteract that. And to be honest, it's not this huge complex thing, but it's enough that actually gives it some teeth. It makes it a little bit more difficult. These officer battles almost become like a game inside of a game, and knowing that random enemy officer might take you down is just something that keeps you on your toes and really makes the game fresh. It was something that I didn't realize how much I needed it in this game until it was there. Now I can't think of playing a Dynasty Warriors game without that. The idea of just continuously hitting the same button against an enemy officer until you break their guard, it just sounds incredibly boring. Or being completely reliant on like your Mushu attacks or something like that. Although there are Mushu attacks in this game, which are pretty cool, and they do a solid bit of damage. They're just not the game changers that they were. And in fact, I think in some ways, a lot of the Dynasty Warriors games of late had kind of overpowered your character, and this definitely takes them back a few steps, but in the best way possible. Like I said, these guys had become almost like gods in the games, and that really kind of made it a little bit boring. There was no difficulty, there was no challenge to it. Don't misunderstand me, this game is definitely not what I would consider a hard game. I can't imagine a lot of people rage quitting over this game. It just has a cool fighting mechanic when you're against enemy officers, and a little bit more depth to a game that I just feel like needed it. So as enemy officers or the boss fights, which the boss fights are epic and amazingly cool, but the game just needed that difference, that change of things. Now, it's not the only thing that's changed. You also choose whatever weapon you want to use, which I think is kind of cool. Since you're not hamstrung to one character, your character individually can use whatever weapon that you really like. And there are a plethora of different weapons to use. You can upgrade the skills and upgrade your abilities with those weapons. But ultimately, I think they did an amazing job with this one, and I am so glad they decided to really breathe new life into this game, in this series. I think one of the things that had always been impressive about Dynasty Warriors way back in the day was just all of like hundreds and hundreds of warriors on the battlefield, and you're hacking and slashing through all these enemies, and it was almost epic and huge. But over time, that kind of lost its shine, if you will. It wasn't as epic or cool. In fact, it was almost just predictable. And so what they did here in a lot of ways is bring that back, bring that excitement back. And they did that, I think, by actually focusing on the one-on-one combat a little bit more. Until you get to the boss fights, which are huge and epic and over the top and amazing. But I'm just saying, like, that excitement of that one-on-one battle, of knowing you could lose to enemy officer and it actually meaning something, I think is what this game really needed. And ultimately, at the end of the day, even the gameplay has been changed and there is some revampedness to it, and I know revampedness isn't a word, but it is now. But ultimately, this is still just a game that's just telling a story, and a really good story at that. It's one of the few games that I'm honestly gonna say I'm glad I paid $70 for it. It was well worth my time, and I don't know, I'll let you be the judge of if you would pick it up. I would advise picking it up if you're a Dynasty Warriors fan. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on Dynasty Warriors. If I was going to give it a number score, I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. It's not perfect, and there is some things that I think could definitely be improved on, but the direction that they're going, I think, is well worth the trip. So I'm excited to see what happens next in the series. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Are you a fan of Dynasty Warriors? Have you been excited about this one? Have you played it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you just not a fan of Dynasty Warriors? I don't know. Anything and everything down in the comment section is much appreciated. I love each and every one of you. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.